Basically, we're going to be talking about rating and the things to do in order to become a good rater and how you can figure out if you're qualified to actually do rating in the first place. And by qualify, I mean like not having the proper gear or anything, but rather the time allotted for actually doing rating and the kind of personality that would be best suited for rating in general. And I'm here, of course, with my lovely friend Edge here.
All right, so Pendragon, I'm going to ask you for people that are brand new and don't really understand. What is MMO? What does an MMO mean? What does an alt mean? What does rating mean? And, what the heck is all of that kind of stuff? Because some people may not actually.
Right, and so there's a lot of acronyms that go along with MMOing and playing in online games in general. So basically, what an MMO is a massively multiplayer online game, and these range from anything from MMO FPS, which is a kind of I think they have the Splinter Cell one out there. There is also Destiny, which is a FPS, and then you got the traditional ones like World of Warcraft, EverQuest, and so forth. And then, yeah, of course, if you want to go further back, you got the MUDs, but we're not going to go that far back. We're going to go into the more recent things, things like World of Warcraft and so forth. And so basically, that's the definition of MMO. Anything pretty much that you play in a group with other people. Not to be confused with co-op games like Borderlands or Payday, stuff like that. That's not really an MMO. That's just a co-op game. MMO is more like a Warcraft type of thing or Destiny. And so, what is a raid in particular? We'll start with that. A raid is basically a large-scale instance. It's not an instance is a closed off area of a game world. Like say, for instance, you go into a dungeon. A dungeon is considered an instance. In some MMOs, city is an actual instance. But in this case of a raid, it's actually a large scale version of that. So basically, in these raids, it takes anywhere from about an hour, sometimes shorter in certain games, up to several days because of the fact that they are quite lengthy. And they typically take anywhere from, I think, as small as 8 players. I might be wrong. And as big as 40 to 60 players. So, as you can imagine, that can get pretty hectic in many cases. In the smaller scale, not so much. It's pretty easy. You can manage anywhere from 8 to 10 people pretty easily. But in the scales of 40 and up, that's when things get a little rowdy, a little crazy, and everybody needs to be actually on point. As
That's true, like the 72-man raids and stuff like that, where it was really crazy because it's like so many freaking people. It's crazy, like way too many.
Yep. And some of the older MMOs, I believe EverQuest has the 72 person raids. So that's pretty up there. And then, of course, if you count Guild Wars open world stuff, then you can easily get way up there too. Because of the fact that there's no instance, and so anyone could just drop along, and boom, there you go, you're in a great raid group. So it can get pretty crazy. Me and Edge both have been through several MMOs over the years. Pretty much any major MMO that's come out in the last 10 years, we've been on. Everything from World of Warcraft and Request up to Star Wars: The Old Republic and WildStar. Anything that was on PC, pretty much. We haven't done any of the console stuff though. But it gets kind of crazy, and there's a lot of people think, okay, I'm playing an MMO, and there's raids. I want to do raids because that's where all the fun stuff happens, and that's where all the cool people are. But unfortunately, for a lot of people, not everybody is capable of doing that. And I don't mean you're not capable because you don't have the proper gear, like I had mentioned before, but rather you're not capable because you don't have the time. And so let's take for an example, housewife A. She goes and she works all day, cleaning the house, whatever, taking care of the kids, and then comes along, the husband comes home, or even in the reverse, house husband A. He does the same thing, he's home all day, whatever. And so basically the other person comes home and so it's time for them to relax. And so the house person is like, okay, I'm gonna go play my MMOs now. Dad's home, mom's home, whatever. Let me go do my thing. And so along the way, while you're on your little MMO, and you're trying to raid, you got to get up in 10 minutes because you got to prepare dinner, or the kids are fighting, or something happened with the cat, and so you got to get up and run, and you got to get up and run. So if you're constantly doing that, if you don't have the time because you're constantly getting up, you're checking on your newborn, or your kids are fighting, or the animal needs to be fed, whatever, whatever, you clearly do not have time to do that raid. And if maybe this is an everyday thing, maybe every day at 8 o'clock you have to have dinner ready, or maybe every day at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock you have to go walk your dog. That clearly means you don't have the time to play the MMO. And you might have to go AFK if you're doing the walk and the dog thing only, and that's probably a more acceptable thing. And people will move on, and you have to play catch up. But if you constantly are getting up and, like I said, you're constantly dealing with kids or the phone or your husband or your wife or whatever, you get the aggro from the spouse. You don't have the time to play, and you really shouldn't be doing MMOs as much as you. I mean, maybe you could do MMOs, but as a more casual player, not as a raider. And I know it sounds kind of harsh and elitist in a way, but the fact of the matter is that you have to consider this. You're playing a game with literally hundreds to even millions of other players, right? And in these smaller settings, you're playing with a group of other individuals who've set their time apart, and they put this time to play this game and to try to clear this content. And you're over here constantly interrupting that particular time. Now they are having a hard time progressing forward. Maybe you're a healer, or maybe even worse, you're a tank and you're constantly going AFK. You are inhibiting that group's progression. They are not able to progress on because you are the tank, and the tank is a very crucial part of a raid because they need to hold the aggro, either for regular mobs or for a boss. And if you are constantly going AFK, especially during a boss fight, you might also just say, you know what, I can't do raids. I'm just gonna leave, and you guys can sub me in. That would be the polite thing to do. That would be the right thing to do. But some people don't understand that. They're like, hold on, guys. I gotta be right back. I gotta go deal with this. And it's like, dude, we're in the middle of a boss fight. And then you're like, oh, well, don't worry about it. Just sub me in. The off tank can do it. No. Okay, just no. You don't do that because what if the off tank is not good? Or maybe the off tank doesn't have the gear or is not attentive or whatever. Then what are you going to do? You're going to cause a wipe, and you're going to have X amount of other people pissed off at you. Be like, well, if this person you know, didn't have the time, and now we died because this other person. Now the main tank gets the blame, and the other tank gets the blame too, because they couldn't keep up with the encounter. Maybe they don't have the gear, maybe they're not skilled with it. And this is talking from experience, because I've seen this happen before, where literally somebody had to go AFK during a boss fight, and it wasn't a tank, thankfully, but it was a healer, and so I'm stuck solo healing, which not to say I'm incapable of doing it, but it's a huge burden. And that kind of goes into another subject about healers in general and kind of the abuse that they suffer. Because sometimes you'll find players who are inconsiderate of the healer's resource. And so basically, healers have a limited amount of healing capabilities. It's not limitless. You either are stuck with a certain amount of mana, or maybe you have spells that are on a specific cooldown, and so you can only heal a person like once every minute or every half minute. And I've played games that are like that.
Some MMOs are like that. They're really crappy, where you have to fight to build your own resource, and if it's not there, it's not there. And so it works differently across all the games. They're not all the MMOs are just not the same.
Yeah, exactly. And so you'll have a healer that's trying to do their damnedest, and they're trying to keep up healing, but then one idiot DPS is off on the side, and he's like hugging the boss, and he's getting raped by the boss. And the healer's trying to keep up healing and trying to keep up healing, and then the tank ends up taking massive damage, and so the healer is fighting to keep up the tank, and then the DPS is like, heal me, heals. And I've seen that on World of Warcraft, where the DPS is being a dumbass, and he's standing in front of the boss, and he's not behind the boss, and he's eating all the AoEs, and he's taking the cleaves, and it's like, shithead, get out of that. And the smart thing to do as a smart healer, just for those who don't know, is to just not heal that DPS. I know it sounds bad, and maybe they're the top DPS, but the fact of the matter is that if you enable that behavior, that's a behavior that is going to be learned by other DPS. And I've seen it. The other DPS will say, well, that person's getting healed and they're in the front, so that means that person is a damn good healer. So let me go and do the same thing because it's all right because I'm gonna be healed, I'm gonna be safe, I'm going to be okay. And that's not right, because the healer again has only a certain amount of resource to do the heals, and you can't keep up with that. And in the end, the healer is going to choose which one is a better option to keep alive, the DPS or the tank. Do I want to be killed or do I want to take that risk of having the DPS hopefully kill the thing in
Advice to all
time?
healers: if you're getting low on mana, just let them die. You know you're gonna probably wipe anyway. Just leave them there and let them fucking die. Actually, the best way to train a DPS is to kill them repeatedly.
Yep.
I found it to be extremely great. Um, I did that a lot tanking too, where I would see the DPS run in, right, with less gear than me, and they would just run in, and it was like, okay, Leroy Jenkins here, I'm gonna go fucking die, and it was funny to me, and so I would just kind of sit back and watch and whatever, it was just really hilarious to me. I'm like, this guy really thinks he can take all those hits. Okay, well, let's just let him go in and be Leroy Jenkins. No problem. I had no particular issue with that. If he wants to go ahead and, run in and tank the instance, I have no problem with it. So the healer and I would just kind of stand there, kind of looking, and we would just walk by him. So what he would do is like he'd go in, grab a group of mobs. Maybe the second, by then he was, at half health. Maybe grab the third one, by then he was dead. And that's if they're like really well geared. And so basically we would just kind of like, walk around where he was at and continue doing the entire instance, leaving him kind of there isolated. That way, if the group stays, with the tank and the healer, the rest of the other people, and we just walk around him, those mobs will reset. So you just kind of like leave them there and then just keep going on about your business.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is that when you have, especially when you have really high end DPS, they get extremely cocky and they feel, I'm going to run in. I can't afford to be killed. So the healer is going to heal me. And I know this as a fact because I've seen it with my own eyes. And they think, I'm going to run in there and then they're not going to let me die. So I'm going to get my heals and I'll be able to get my kills. Maybe they're watching the leaderboards and they want to be top DPS. Or maybe they're just overconfident and feel like, I'm badass. I won't have to worry about it. And that is a problem because you're already immediately
Mm-hmm.
taxing the healer before the encounters even begin. And that's again that's kind of abusive behavior really as a person who's seen it happen. As a DPS, please don't do that. That's my plea to you as a healer. Don't do that to your DPS. I mean, don't do that to healers because it's not right. It just isn't right. And it stresses out the tank even because the tank has to say, okay, you know what? I had to do my job. I had to run forward and grab this before this idiot gets killed. And so it starts encounters faster than the group might be ready for. And some people think it's funny. Some people be like, well, I just want to rush through the instance. Well, what's the rush? Where do you have to go? If you have someplace to go, don't play MMOs. Don't do instances. I had to say it slowly
Yeah, because
because some
that's
people are
something that
slow.
you do in your time out. Exactly. Say it really, really slow because people are stupid. So that's the thing, is that, they have no time, but they go up and they group up for a group activity or for a raid, and it's like, well, you didn't have the time to begin. What the fuck are you doing here? Exactly. MMOs are for bored people or people that have or can afford at least a couple hours or whatever, at least 3 times a week at a minimum, okay, of their spare time donated to their hobby, because gaming is a hobby. Okay, so you don't have the time, don't be there.
Yep. I've only got a half an hour, guys. Come on, let's hurry this up. Fool, get the fuck off my MMO. Get out of my group. You only have a half an hour to play. Don't play. Go do grinding. Go do some farming. Go do, something else. A quick instance. Do crafting. And that brings up another thing. It's like, what is farming? To those who don't know what a farming thing is, it's not, planting seeds. It's not gathering crops. This is not Farmville we're talking about here. Okay, farming is basically running an instance or killing a specific set of mobs over and over to get a specific item or to get specific items. And this also goes for gathering materials. Maybe you're farming for ores because you are some sort of metal crafter. Maybe you're farming some seeds because there actually is farming in your particular MMO. Maybe you're farming for, leather from animals or whatever. There's different types of farming that can be done. And that's what it is. It's basically going and killing the same thing over and over again, or, gathering the same item over and over again to try to stockpile for whatever you may need them for.
So, how do you know if you can't raid? When you don't have time, you said, and when you have a poor personality.
Yes.
And what else? When do you not raid? How do you know that, I shouldn't be raiding?
Well, that's
My family needs a certain amount of time. How do I know if raiding is for me to begin with?
well, basically, it's kind of like one of those points we mentioned before. You have to have the time for it. If you don't have the time for it, you shouldn't be rating, period. Um, Another thing is, again, your personality. But there's another thing that a lot of people overlook. Can your PC handle it? Now, a lot of people tend to look at the minimum requirements for games and they say, well, this says 4 gigabytes of RAM as a minimum requirement. I've got that. It says have, and just I don't know a good low end video card. Maybe it's like some NVIDIA 600 or something like that. And I have that. Okay, so I have the minimum requirements. Okay, let me go do my raids.
The
Okay.
500 or 600 series, like, sorry, that's already dated.
Yeah, now we're up to like 900s and shit. So basically,
Yeah,
you, ha-
900 series.
yeah, so basically now you're looking at your PC specs. You say, I just meet the minimum requirements. I can play this game. I could do this MMO. Now, what you're not taking into consideration here is the fact that even though you do, whoa, something just blew up in front of me. Even though you have the minimum requirements for that game and to do the content, it doesn't mean that you can ah, adequately do the content in question. Now, why do I say that? The reason why I say that is because it's taking it as if you are sitting there in the city with nobody else in the city, with no other particular actions going on, no spells being cast. If you sit there like that with nothing happening, yes, you can run the game. Now, what it's not telling you is that if you are in a instance, and particularly in a raid instance, can your PC handle all of the content happening? You got the mobs, you got anywhere from 7 to 36 and even higher amount of other players in the instance with you, and you have the animations in said instance, as well as the individuals casting their individual particular spells. That could be anywhere from a highly visual animated series of particles to just a generic, melee attack. And a lot of people don't take that into account and they think, okay, why am I lagging? I can play outside normally, or, if I'm doing another instance, everything's going fine. The reason why you're lagging is because even though you meet the minimum requirements, you're not meeting the overall, real requirements for the game because all the animations and everything else is lagging your computer out because your computer cannot handle it. Maybe your game doesn't, I mean, maybe your video card doesn't support shaders. There's a lot of video cards that don't support shaders. Maybe your processor can handle it.
Maybe your
May-
processor is really crappy. Maybe you don't have very good RAM. Maybe you have the really cheap RAM and you don't have anything
Yeah,
that's like higher speed with its own heatsink. You don't. There's a lot of things that could take into consideration. It's not just RAM, but I think the point is that having the bare minimum does not guarantee that you can actually handle that particular game. It also does not guarantee gaming developer shitty programming. It does not guarantee how they have made their game stable. It does not guarantee any pockets that they may have that could be problematic. It doesn't guarantee, all their other bugs and problems that they have into the game that they're clearly not interested in fixing. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into consideration. Maybe it's not just you. Maybe it's that gaming developer. These people have not optimized their game properly. So you have 4 gigabytes of RAM. But the game's not stabilized right. So that's not going to do shit anyways. So that's the kind of thing to really look out for when it comes to stuff like that is something that you really should take into consideration. Um, you know, my computer may have 4 gigabytes of RAM, but you know what? My operating system may be inefficient. I may have an old operating system and it might actually take a portion of the 4 gigabytes. And now I'm at a loss because, my operating system requires a certain amount. So really I'm under what the minimum requirement is, but I'm going to say I have everything to run it and I'm going to blame everybody because my computer is very cheap. First of all, gaming is a hobby, guys. You go and you buy an expensive fishing pole for this, that, and the other, and your freaking baits and all your bullshit, and especially fly fishing can get quite expensive too. So you go and you have all this other stuff to deal with when it comes to a particular hobby. Hobbies are expensive. You can't afford your internet bill, you should not be raiding. You should not be on the internet. If you have to steal Wi-Fi from people, you have no business being on there. The other thing to look for is if your computer, like you said, cannot actually handle it. If you have a shitty attitude, shit like this is very important for people to realize this may not be for me. Okay. And again, like I said, things are not always going to be optimized to what you would like them to be. So that's another issue that you're going to have to, whether you like it or not, you're going to have to deal with it, and you're going to have to, deal with all these other things that happen. So it's entirely up to you. And like I said, you don't have to raid. No one's forcing you to, so you can just leave. But the reality is there are things that are going to happen that you may or may not like or not be ready for. So one of the things to definitely keep an eye for is, can your computer handle it? You know, Try, do a little math and sit there with, how many resources it's actually taking, and then realize if it's time for an upgrade. Because gaming is a hobby and it is expensive. You shouldn't torture people with your shit computers, period, ever. It's not their problem that you can't afford your bills. It's not their problem that you can't afford to go golfing because you don't have golf clubs and you have to rent them all the time, and you're, living paycheck to paycheck. Well, then don't have things like a cell phone when you're broke. Don't have internet bills when you can't afford it. Don't have crappy computers and say, I'm going to be a gamer. Now, you're going to a crappy computer, but you're a casual gamer? No problem. Okay? Keep your crappy computer. You're going to log in 2 frames per second, and you're going to be crafting anyway, so it doesn't really freaking matter, and that's what makes you happy. Like as we say in Spanish, cada loco con su tema means, every crazy person has their own theme, their own shit going. So, basically, if you're casual, okay, no problem. But if you're going to raid, do not torture other people with your very cheap, nasty computer. Save some money. Don't raid for a while and get some computer upgrades or whatever, and then go ahead and go and do your raiding. Okay. You don't drive your car when you know it's falling apart 3,000 miles across the country just for the hell of it. Why? Your car's falling apart. Why would you drive 3,000 miles? Are you stupid? Are you that retarded? So it's kind of one of those things where it's common sense. You can't beat the duck over common sense. It's not going to happen. So if your computer cannot handle rating, then stay away from it. It's not hard. It's a very simple thing. You can't handle it. Okay, don't do it. And don't expect other people to deal with you. The worst thing to hear in a rating situation, I'm lagging like a lamb. Oh my God, I had a guildie that used to do that shit. She would talk like that. It drove me fucking mental. I can't stand that kind of shit. And people will always blame it on their lag. Well, then switch your ISP. You're spending money to game. Gaming is a luxury. Change your ISPs. Try to get something better. Or maybe consider
Don't
not
use
having,
Comcast.
cable. Yeah, maybe consider, freaking cable to be obsolete. Maybe go and actually get a satellite connection and actually pay the money to have a satellite connection and have a notch that's actually servicing you, that's working better than, direct TV, like wannabe satellite TV and shit. That's not really satellite TV, but that's my opinion with it. Maybe go to something else, that's a little better, that can suit whatever needs it is that you're having. But if you can't afford Wi-Fi and you can't afford a computer and you don't have the time, I qualify that as you're not able to raid. I'm sorry.
No, you got it right on. And that was actually touching on another point I wanted to get to. If your internet cannot handle it, you should not be doing raiding at all. You probably shouldn't even do much of online gaming, really, because you're going to be annoyed from, not being able to play the game because your connection is going to be shit. And not only that, but you're going to annoy other people because your connection is going to be shit.
Yeah, you can't make other people pay for your personal problems. It's just not nice.
So frustration and a hindrance, and that's
Yeah, it is very frustrating. I agree with that. And so basically, that is what rating is. That's what MMOs are. That's what they mean. And I would definitely say that if you don't have the time to raid, to look for a guild or someone that can accommodate your time. Just because you don't have a particular time doesn't mean you have to stay in that guild. True, you may have friends that you make and you really like the people, but in reality is, if you do want to raid and they're not able to meet your needs, your current needs, you need to go find another guild, instead of staying there and being a burden to the rest of the group. So that's one of the things. Just go, you open up local chat and you say, these are my current hours of availability. Are there any raiding guilds that can raid me during this particular time? There you go, done. Because they do have some of them, do have lockouts and stuff, and so you do have to coordinate and get a certain amount of people. Random rating does not typically work. There are a lot of wannabe rating guilds that are not rating guilds at all. They're liars because they do random rating. And what random rating does is that it goes and it rates people according to who's available online. And the other people that could not get in cannot be rated now because everyone's on a loot lockout. So this is a problem. Okay, so do not go and assume that a random rating guild is going to be the perfect thing. I'm actually against those kind of guilds because they don't equally and fairly distribute loot to all of their members, and they don't equally go and fairly distribute um, not just loot, but their time equally in gearing someone particularly. And while it's supposed to be fun, everyone's supposed to also get something out of it. So if you cannot gear all of your raiders currently, and you do random rating, then you really should think about maybe handing over the guild to somebody that can actually manage it properly, and that can make sure that people are actually being rated fairly. Um, and so that's another thing too, is looking for what is fair for you, and obviously what it is that you particularly like. But sometimes you got to settle for a different MMO. Maybe there's an MMO, and I do want to bring this up. Maybe there's an MMO that requires a lot more of your time than, let's say, you have 6 to 7 hours per week that you can dedicate to your particular MMO. And in those 6 to 7 hours, you're finding that you don't have enough time to actually play it. Time to switch MMOs. You really like that one, really shit. It's really crappy and it's really shitty that you have to go and that you have to switch MMOs. But sometimes that has to be done. When I found myself that I was way too busy for WoW, I went and I started playing another MMO, which I actually liked and actually stayed with it for about almost 5 years. Okay, and I liked that particular game, and I gave it a try. I gave it a chance. I really liked it, and I really enjoyed the rating. It was less people. It was less hectic because the rates were really really short, and it was a lot more fun. Okay, so I thought, okay, for my schedule now, that was okay. And then and then you think, okay, well maybe when your schedule opens up a bit more, okay, then you can go back to your previous MMO that you're really stoked about, that you really really like. Okay, but sometimes you have to do something as switching your MMO, and sometimes it's perfectly appropriate to switch your MMO. If some MMOs are too much of a time sink, find one that isn't. I mean, I've actually done that. I've experienced that, and it actually went very well for me. So, and I really enjoyed it for a very long time. Like I said, if your current MMO is too much of a pain in the ass, you find another one that you can tolerate. The MMOs are all pretty much going to be the same shit, but maybe one has a little bit less time crunch. And that's the one thing about certain MMOs, are so much of a time sink that no human being that works full time really has time for all of the entire content and to experiment and try out everything that MMO has to offer, because there isn't enough time. Either the MMO has too much content, or either the MMO's content currently in place, it just takes too long to do every last little thing. So that's when you say, gee, thanks, I really had a great time on this MMO, but it's time for me to switch because the gaming developers want me to live and die on this MMO, and I don't have time for that shit right now. Unfortunately, my schedule and my life, comes before. So in that case, like I said, switch your MMO. Never be afraid of doing it. There's nice people everywhere. You can find, rating guilds anywhere. You might find that you might even, switch to a PvP MMO, and that seems to fit your schedule better. You might find that doing quick matches or even co-ops with your friends are even better than, what you currently have. Um, so definitely, by all means, if you have to switch your MMO because something is too grindy on your current MMO, switch, because human beings are busy. Not everyone's unemployed or retired online. So, people do have to survive and pay their bills and things of that nature, and that's perfectly understandable. But switch the MMO. Not only can your PC handle it, is your MMO too much of a pain in the ass? Get another one. And, very simple.
Yeah, yep, all good points, and totally agree with you on all of that. If you just can't do it, if you just don't have the time, just please don't do it, people. Be considerate.
Exactly. If you don't have the time, stay casual and settle for less gear, because that would be the logical thing to do.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Just want to put it out there. You people who like to say filthy casual, there's nothing wrong with being casual. It's perfectly fine.
No, there isn't, because the casuals support the game a certain amount of money too, not just the raiders.
Mm-hmm.
So, the raiders will farm until they can't get any more gear, and then they'll leave the content. The casual ones, it's funny enough that you say that, because I noticed that the casual ones that stay more long term and for longer amount of times, while the raiders, when they're done with the shit, they start complaining they have nothing to do, and then they bail or go to another game, right? And that's the same thing with the PvPers that are always crying like little stupid babies. Okay, we haven't had a new map in 6 months. I'm out of here. Goodbye. But the casual ones will stay, even if you can't push them or force them to raid or whatever. They will stay and they'll pop on a little bit more. It might be more sporadically, but it's for longer periods of time. So the casual people are paying just as much money as you are. You have no right to discriminate them because they don't have the same exact liking or taste that or type of your particular gaming style or play that you have, because actually all of the players in there, regardless of how you like to play your PvE or PvP, PvE being player versus environment, PvP meaning player versus player. So you're people are all different types of gamers, and the MMOs are aware of that, which is why they offer the different types of content for the different types of gamers that are available with their certain product, because MMOs are a business. They're not there because they truly care about you and they care about your enjoyment. They're there at the end of the day to make money. And when you realize that, you will come to the realization of how these MMOs typically work, and what they can and cannot offer, and what you're willing to handle or not. You don't go buy a new house because you can't afford the extra, mortgage payment, or you don't buy that expensive car that you don't have the money to buy because it's going to put a financial burden on your family. You don't game when you don't have the money for it. You don't, have online internet access when you can't afford the bill every month. So these are all things to keep into consideration, and I really appreciate you touching on all of those points.
Yep, it's better to keep people informed than to just expect people to realize these things on their own. There's a lot of MMOers out there that, they get mad at newbies. They were new at one point too. Well, all of us started out new. All of us came on the ground floor at one point or another, and we didn't know what was what. And we only learned through, finding out the information, either by a friend telling us or by figuring it out on our own, and it's better for the community if we help out other people and let them know this is how it is. These are the rules, well, not really rules, but these are the things to take into consideration before you jump into any MMO.
Yep, and keep into consideration your options and the different types of MMOs that are available. Rating is not for everybody. Maybe you find another MMO that's, like I said before, it takes less time. Or you find one that's a little bit more fun because it's a little less hectic. Or maybe you like this other MMO because the crafting isn't a pain in the ass. And let's say you like to craft, but you don't want to spend your whole entire life there crafting on a virtual MMO, making virtual little pieces of shit that don't really amount to anything later. So these are all things to consider. Lots of games out there. You can have tons and tons and tons of fun. You just have to find the right one for you.
And I guess in closing, I'll say, as always, be considerate to everyone and happy gaming.